at the time of partition, we largely have these archaeological museums, which were, based in Taxila, Peshawar, Lahore, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and elsewhere. Now, now, for a long time, these museums, as you understand, were regulated by the Department of Archaeology and Museums. Till such point that that their number increased, their portfolio diversified, and it was now thought that probably now a different institutional arrangement is needed to harmonize the strength of all these museums together, and knit them under in a system where they are regulated by almost like a single authority. Now, this particular, Punjab uh, Museum Board Ordinance 2021 is to my mind is a very major reform initiative by the present government, and since it has been sort of notified on 25th March through an ordinance rather than through provincial assembly parliamentary process. So it has almost come as a shock and a surprise to for a whole lot of people who are either working for museum or associated with museum, includes museologists, scholars, archaeologists, and also the general public and so on. So I think there was a need to have a stakeholder consultation for the reform process to actually create a public opinion around it and elicit feedback. Now, today, this particular sort of webinar is actually one such exercise, right, which should have taken place earlier on. Now, uh, as you could see from the people that we have gathered as speakers, I have specially requested Attique Ahmad, who is also part of the Punjab Government Information and Culture Department, but also playing a very important role as Secretary Museum Association of Pakistan. Likewise, you could see we have a barrister, young barrister, as a speaker, whom we have requested to actually reflect on this ordinance itself as a legal mind. And we all are free to explore the implication or the projections, and we can bounce off, ideas and suggestions from that presentation. Likewise, you could see Professor Sajida Vandal is here, who is eminent architect as well as a heritage expert, if you like, and she's been principal National College of Arts for so many years, which itself is an autonomous body. So when I thought of Professor Vandal, I thought of these two things, where she has a hands-on experience of running an autonomous body, which it's a federal body, which has a large-scale sort of operation, so to say. At the same time, she's somebody who has been sitting on the board of many of these museums and have a hands-on research experience of museum education and so much around the museum that she had done in her life. So I think that places her in a good position to actually reflect on this new law, and it will be delightful to hear her comments. And finally, we think that UNESCO to be honest, it's an intergovernmental body that we really look up to for policy and advice. And we believe that UNESCO should have been consulted on this, but still, I think a whole lot of policies and practices of UNESCO are being incorporated, or hopefully will be incorporated through this law. So we believe that this particular opportunity is the very first opportunity we are having, where we are kind of sitting around the table in a way to deliberate the law and explore its implication. Now, before I have a few comments on the law itself, I've gone through it in detail. I would say that since it is quite sort of early or premature, in fact, to talk much deep into the topic of this museum reforms in Pakistan, because the rules and regulations which are drawn on this ordinance have not been made up as yet. So there's a whole lot of questions which probably will be raised by the speakers and our listeners, which will have no answers because there are no rules and regulations in place as yet. At the same time, I think this gives us a great opportunity to actually have those ideal rules and regulation for museums in Pakistan. You must remember that museum services in Pakistan are scattered and sort of not standardized. People working in one museum and the other museum are not on a comparative scale. Probably there is a need for reform. And so this particular ordinance also gives us the opportunity to do things which have never been done before. Because remember, these museums were created around that colonial administration, and finally they were dominated by archaeology. Now, having looked at this law, I think this point that leads me to this very important point, that you could see a shift in the role of our museums from archaeology centric now to the tourism centric. Now, as you could see, the vice chairperson, as my friends will explain the law in detail, vice chairperson of this particular board is actually Secretary Tourism. Now, that puts a kind of a different spin on the role of museum, wherein the primary role of museum for research and education, now it will be like more towards, publicity and promotion, bring in tourists and so on. So I think, obviously, I'm passing a value judgment on this new role, but this is the kind of emphasis that we see has sort of come up in this particular ordinance, which need to be consciously sort of emphasized and well thought of. So I think these are the kind of risks and opportunities that I see in the new ordinance. And as I said, I would request each one of you to spare around 10 minutes. I think I've run out of my 10 minutes now. And I would now invite Attique Ahmad, to actually, take the floor.
Uh, when it was a period of devolution in Pakistan, what I did, my effort to bring all museums together, either they are working in different capacities and in different administrations. I relaunched Museum Association of Pakistan so that we must have a combined forum. And 3 years back, me, along with my executive director and the Secretary Information and Culture, we discussed an idea to set up a Directorate of Museums in Punjab, so that every district must have a museum and having some policy, a combined policy in terms of interpretation, excavations, presentation of the museum, staff trainings, etc. So this idea was really appreciated by Raja Jahangir Anwar. He is the Secretary Information and Culture. And through a summary, we approved this Directorate of Museums. And for the last 2 years, we were getting grants, but unfortunately, it could not be made functional. And present government did a best job by creating this museums board ordinance 2021. So, in short, I have a small presentation on the background of museums, their year of making. So, Punjab have almost more than 50 museums. You can scroll down, Nadeem, this
Yes,
presentation.
sir.
Just these museums, it's just, for information of all. Please scroll down. Please scroll down, and up to 47 up to 70. Please scroll down. So this is analysis of the museums in Punjab, the government of Punjab. So we have 45 museums, all museums, including private museums, out of which 27 are government museums. So total museums, among all these museums, total museums are located in 26 museums in Lahore, and on the other parts, it's 19 museums. So we have 6 private museums and 5 university museums, small museums in Punjab. So this analysis, I think, will support my idea that how the Directorate of Museums was important, or the Board of Governors Punjab Museum is important. So presently, 3 museums of Punjab are being governed by the Punjab Educational and Training Institutions Ordinance 1962 under Information and Culture Department, Government of Punjab. This is Lahore Museum, Bahawalpur Museum, and the Lalpur Museum. Next, please. Uh, Once the Department of Archaeology Punjab was an attached department of the Information and Culture Department. So in case these museums, the Taxila Museum, Harappa Museum, and other museums, they were under Department of Archaeology and Museums. And after devolution, the federal museum located in Punjab were transferred to the Punjab Archaeology Department, like Harappa Museum, Taxila Museum, Ghala Akbar House Museum, etc. So these were the now museums are working under Department of Archaeology and Museums. In past, our museums were have best research side and curatorial staff. This is the main point. Our working of our museums is an old pattern. We have very good research staff and curatorial staff. The present setup of museums in terms of staff and their working is that we have curatorial staffs only, and we have research staff in our museums. But we need to induct more people uh, who are well equipped with creative economy, creative thinking, marketing, product development, capacity building, so much. So if you go next, please, next slide, please. Tarar, yes. So if you go through the powers and functions of the Punjab Museums Board, so which clearly tell everything that why this board has been created to formulate policies. So this was the need of the time that somebody, some institution must exist to formulate the policies, plans and programs of protection, maintenance and management of museums. Individually, they are doing very well, but overall, we need to combine our interest in the museum sector in Punjab, manage and regulate the finance, accounts, and investments of the museums, determine the terms and conditions of service of the CEO who will be heading this board and its employees, ensure etiquette and effective governance and a risk management system in authority, promote and develop partnership with other organizations. Like we have 5 museums, suppose in this ordinance, we combine 7 museums. So we have 45 museums in Punjab. So coordination between all museums and asking them to accept the policy, anonymous policy of the functioning of our museums. So partnership definitely is an important thing. Enter into contracts in conformity with the purposes of the ordinance, approve annual accounts, budget and estimates of the expenditure, lend any object of the museum for public exhibition, set up such committees. This is important, as they may be required for purposes of the ordinance. Next, please. Next, please. Next.
I think you can just conclude and make your comments.
Yes, I am concluding. Frame, regulations from the conduct of business of the board, formulate procedure and necessary framework. So all these powers and functions which has been allocated to the board is need of the time and very important. Might be if you go through the present structure of the museums, they have not this kind of powers and functions. So in terms of a body for the regulation of to regulate the museum, this is best, I think, at present, this is the best body. And what we are thinking, that stakeholders must be taken on board. So there will be subcommittees, and so next procedure is that all stakeholders will be taken on board to discuss and to formulate rules and regulations, what kind of interpretation policies, what kind of creative thinking and economy, and what kind of staff development strategies. So I think I'm very much, being a Secretary General, satisfied with this Punjab Museum's ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attique Sab, for leading us through the ordinance. You have probably preempted our young barrister, Mashaam Shiraz, whom I am now inviting to reflect on the ordinance. Mashaam, please.
To give a bit of background, so far in Pakistan, as our learned guest earlier had explained, the government was regulating museums through various government departments, previously through the Department of Museums and through various other government bodies. But now they have attempted to create a body that will be responsible for the governance and for the upkeep of museums in the province of Punjab. Previously, there were the acts like Antiquities Act 1975 and the Lahore Museums Regulations, which were governing different organizations, different museums in particular. But now so the purpose of the Punjab Museums Board Ordinance 2021 is to be an overarching sort of a statute. It is a parent statute, an enabling law that creates a framework that will allow for further development of law in this particular area. And there's not a lot of substantial provisions that are in this law. It is primarily procedural to the extent of the museum's board and what the purpose and the functioning of the museum's board will be. So I'll give you a bit of a rundown through the law. As the preamble very clearly states, it is necessary to establish the Punjab Museums Board for efficient maintenance and management of the museums in Punjab and for ancillary matters. So the purpose of this law was for efficient management of the museums. And so just to explain, not all museums will come under the ambit of the Punjab Museums Board Ordinance, but rather those museums that are notified under the ordinance, they will fall within the scope of the law, as per the scheme that is set out in this act. So to give you a rundown, at the moment, as per section 1(3) of this act, of this ordinance, it states that it shall apply to such museums as the government may, by notification in the official gazette, specify from time to time. So it's very clear that at the moment, the applicability of the museums will be dependent on what notification the government passes, and through that such notification, which museums this ordinance will be extended to. Moving forward, I'll not, due to the paucity of time, I'm not going to go through every provision of the law, but rather the most important and the pertinent provisions, which I believe are which are relevant for the purpose of this webinar. Section 3 of this ordinance is what constitutes this board, and it states that the government shall, by notification in the official gazette, establish a board to be known as the Punjab Museums Board for carrying out the purposes of this ordinance. So this board, the Punjab Museum Board, is constituted under section 3, and further section 4 sets out the composition of the said law. Section 4 states that the board will have a chairperson who will be nominated by the Chief Minister of Punjab, and the vice chairperson will be the secretary to the Government Tourism Department, as I believe our learned guest earlier was. And there will be other members to this board, which will include the secretary to the Government Planning and Development Department or his representative, the secretary to the Government Finance Department or his representative, the secretary to the Government Information and Cultural Department or his representative, the Director General of Archaeology of the Government of Punjab. There'll be a member from the Provincial Assembly of the Punjab, which will be nominated by the Chief Minister. There'll be 5 persons who will be selected from the private sector, and including one woman who will have expertise preferably in the fields of museology, history, anthropology, art history or archaeology, cultural and heritage management, financial administration or marketing. So the setup is such that there are official representatives or official members of the board, as well as non-official members from the private sector. And these non-official members, 5 members, out of which there must be women, at least one woman, these will be nominated by the Chief Minister of Punjab on the recommendation of the Minister of the Tourism or the Secretary of the Government Tourism Department. And they'll be appointed, these non-official members will be appointed for a term of 3 years. Moving forward, Section 6 sets out the scope of the CEO, and it states that the Chief Minister shall appoint the CEO from amongst a panel of qualified experts possessing such qualifications and experience as may be prescribed by the regulations. So the qualifications and the experience of the CEO is not yet set out in this ordinance in itself, but rather will be further specified in the rules and regulations that are to follow. Further moving forward, the most important section, in my opinion, of this ordinance is Section 8, the powers and the functions of the board. As Mr. Attique very kindly earlier shed light on this particular section of the ordinance, the purpose of the board is to formulate policies, plans, and programs for the protection, maintenance, and management of the museum. And there are other functions as well, but this is the primary focus of this board. And continuing forward, it includes managing and regulating the finances, the accounts, and investments of the museums. So whatever museums are notified under this ordinance, those museums will, the management of such museums and the regulation of the finances, accounts, and investments of such museums will be regulated by the board. Furthermore, the board, apart from other ancillary functions such as framing other rules and regulations, approvals of annual accounts, etc., the board shall impart training in the field of museology. It'll provide researchers the access to antiquities, and it'll collaborate with world museums for the exchange of relevant expertise. So the board has been given wide powers in this regard to take action when it comes to the museums in Pakistan. Moving forward, the other 2 important points that I'd like to, the 2 important provisions that I'd like to point out is Section 9.2, which states, which is in regard to the employees of the museum. So it states that the existing employees of the museum may opt to continue in their existing cadre, or may opt to become employees of the board within 1 year of the commencement of this ordinance. So what it states is that there might be 2 parallel systems running for the employees of the museums, whereas in one, the employees may come under the board, or in the other, the employees may continue to be governed by the rules and regulation as per the existing cadre. Lastly, funds. So very importantly, funds. The board will generate funds which from the income of the museums, and the board will establish a fund which will be known as the Punjab Museums Board Fund. And it'll comprise of a few sources, which it'll basically be filled with a few sources, which include incomes that are generated from museums, the grants that are made by the government of Punjab or the federal government, any loans that are obtained from the government of Punjab or from the federal government, any foreign aids or loans that are granted to the board, any other contributions and donations from other individuals, local bodies, corporations, institutions, organizations, and agencies. So the board has, what this law does is that the board can be funded from a variety of sources and will not be entirely dependent on the government for the upkeep of and for promotion of the work that the board is responsible for doing, but rather any donations or contributions of the private sector can also help the museums in Pakistan in this manner. Lastly, the two important provisions that will further develop the law in this regard are sections 18 and 19, which deal with the power to make rules which under which the government has the power to make rules for carrying out the purpose of this ordinance, and Section 19, which deals with the regulations, which gives the board the power to create regulation, to draft and notify regulations and frame regulations for the purposes of this ordinance. So this was a brief taking you through the ordinance and legally what the provisions entail. Lastly, just shedding some light on a few other things. So at the moment, the law has been passed, as Nadeem Saab at the very outset stated, has been passed as an ordinance. What this means is that the governor of Punjab has approved this law, and he's considered that because there was no session of the Provincial Assembly in force at the moment, he's passed this law, and eventually under Article 128 of the Constitution of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, this ordinance will have to be set before the Provincial Assembly and will have to be approved by the Provincial Assembly within 90 days. There's an entire procedure for that. If the provincial assemblies don't, if this is not put forward before the Provincial Assembly within 90 days, the ordinance will lapse. So there's a very important responsibility on the government, and in particular the government of Punjab, to ensure that if it wants this museum board ordinance to survive, unlike many other laws that have been passed by the provincial and the federal government in the past few years, it is very important that this is put forward before the Provincial Assembly and it is approved, so that with or without any amendment, so that this may become law. And with that, I'll hand over the floor to Mr. Nadeem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barrister Mashaam, for leading us through the ordinance. And now we all know the nitty-gritty of it, and we'll be able to formulate our responsive on more solid grounds. I mean, as I like to invite Professor Sajida Vandal to reflect on her experience and reflect on the law itself, I think that as we were discussing earlier on when we were brainstorming the subject with Professor Vandal, that one thing that really strikes, and I would like Professor Vandal to reflect on it, how far this board is going to be a management board and how far it can act as a policy board. Now, this is a subject that I think is very important to understand. And likewise, we have seen the experience of autonomous institution in Pakistan. There is a certain personality cult that dominates over the administration. And if that personality is sort of wisely, is actually professionally sort of, if that authority is professionally exercised, then probably those institutions grow. But if they don't, they do fall apart. So now we have these very important museums, which are going to be at the disposal, if you like, of this very high-powered management board. So what will happen to it? So I will request Professor Vandal to also respond to this question before, as she, lays bare the subject in her own way. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Omar. Nadeem Omar. First, let me just compliment some of the people who are here, because I know Attique has been working very hard to have some kind of a framework under which museums can operate. And so I think its input has been great, and I would like to I'd like to appreciate that. The way I look at this law is a starting point, because I think when the more you reflect on it and the more you look at it, particularly with the experience that we have of how the government functions, and how it views the autonomy of boards or institutions. So I think that becomes very critical kind of a way to see how we can build that on. But I'd like to kind of reflect on 3 or 4 very basic issues. I think we need to acknowledge that this law has come out of the Act, the 18th Amendment, which brought culture and education into the province. And I feel it's a great opportunity for provinces likewise to not keep the control within the center or within its capital, but to let it devolve downwards, so that we can have a more democratic and a more participatory way of functioning. I know that a lot of people have been talking about this as regulations. There's an emphasis on regulations. And I think we need to bring in the emphasis of participation and also of facility, because all these rules and regulations are meant to be there to help you function better. Now, the first critical issue comes out, in my view, is this, that there has to be some way now through the regulations or through these 2 months that the barrister has mentioned that we have between the ordinance and the act, to try and bring in a more stakeholder voice into this. I think it should, in my view, I feel if it had gone through the process of an act, perforce you would have had a lot of people, deliberating on it, and that may have been better. But I also understand that given the circumstances that we face out there, perhaps it's nicer to have an ordinance and then, to go forward. So the top-down approach, I think we need to how we can bring it from a grassroots approach. Because Attique has showed us the 45 museums which are already in the Punjab, and I know several others which are being considered. To tie it up to the whole tourism focus that Punjab now has, and there are important projects which are underway. Some of them are, within the ambit of UNESCO, and there's a World Bank fund there and all that. With that tourism kind of focus, the museums are going to grow, because we have been doing we have developed 2 integrated site management plans, and in both the plans there are museums. And the current plan, which is that we are developing, which is in Multan, there are at least in that area 2 or 3 museum or museum-like places, right, which are coming up. Now, people are also talking of museums, for example, the Museum of Interpretation. And one of the interesting conversations which is going on is bringing in a museum of the People's Museum, the freedom struggles during the partition period, or the struggle post-partition in the military regime. So there's going to be a whole variety of museums, and there are a large number that we are looking at. So I would imagine that we should be looking at this board more as a policy making body, because it's not possible for them to get into the nitty-gritty of small little kind of museums here and there. And falling back on my experience of the NCA, now NCA was one institution administered under the administrative control of the Ministry of Education, and we were having a tough time getting even the smallest things passed by them. The nitty-gritty, there's issues there which are in institutions, which are day-to-day issues. So if we start visualizing a board which is going to go into a day-to-day issues of 60 museums of the future, it's going to be a complete disaster. So I think we should start pushing towards, this being as the coordinating, board with very clear powers of policy-making bodies. And then, it's going into the sub-provincial level, whether you want to make it into a district level or a divisional level or something like that. So it has to devolve somehow there. And the participatory aspect of it has to also, be enhanced somehow. Because at the moment, what are you looking at? It's a typical board that has been functioning here since boards came into being. And, it goes back into the Bhutto period. Well-meaning, but then in its actual implementation and functioning, you run into massive problems. Because you see, you have the chairman there appointed by the chief minister, and there's some word also used, he will retain that position, to the pleasure of the chief minister kind of beings or whatever happens. That means that he's in a very vulnerable position. You have a very vice chairman who's a government, functionary. He's a very good man at the moment. I know the Secretary of Tourism, but the point is this, that in its makeup, it is absolutely heavily controlled by the government. I do not think that cultural institutions should have this kind of a rigid control by governments. It is a professional kind of a, function. It's a function of the people. There are many cultural, professionals in our country. And we should be clearly defining what is the CEO going to be, because we have just heard very recently how, various, they are well-meaning people. I'm not saying that at all. But the point is this, that they're not really equipped to deal with, cultural institutions. And then you constantly run into problems with that. I think one is that area of, that we need to kind of look at. And the other thing I was going to mention is this, that we must also focus and bring that discussion into that arena, that what is actually the function of museums? What are they there for? Because we've, the educational aspect of these museums is very limited. The sense of ownership of people around, or people who have, it's still called Ajaib Ghar, the Lahore Museum, right? So we have to also evolve a terminology and make it so that it becomes, plays its true role in society. So I think we also need to kind of think about that. Then just a couple of things that. Then, there's a whole issue of which we don't really attend to with the kind of seriousness that we should, that, whether we do have capacity. The first question will come up if you're thinking of sub-provincial level of boards and then a coordinating board, which could be one that the barrister mentioned, that is in the ordinance, then where is the capacity issue being addressed? Is it sufficiently addressed? And when you bring in all this motley crowd of people together, do they really have the capacity to actually act as board members? So there must be some kind of a mechanism placed within it. At least I'm not a lawyer, but I can just say that to be placed within the ambit of your ordinance or your act, which absolutely makes it mandatory, whatever it is. And the financial part, now that is where the real crux of the problem comes in. I'm not going to mention the name of the boards which are functioning still in Punjab. These are government foundations and boards, very much with the same mandate to control the finances. Now, that financial financial areas are very delicate areas to get in. So as a result, what happens is those, boards which have massive funds at their disposal, mostly they don't even meet. There's no fund utilization taking place, and there are endowment funds which are growing and growing and growing, and there's no utilization because there's no clarity in that again. So I think the opportunity that we have at the moment is that the ordinance clearly says that there must be rules and regulations which are drafted out. And I'm very happy that your organization, Nadeem, has taken this initiative. I think we need to focus more, and many of us are very happy to help out.
Right.
And how do you utilize this, ordinance and make it as a great opportunity? Okay.
Right.
I think that's it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Professor Vandal, for your commitment for cultural heritage, as well as your, this great offer that we need all to work together to actually turn this ordinance into a really functioning law that help promote, preserve museums. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Patricia McPhillips, who is the Director and Representative of UNESCO in Pakistan. She had a long and illustrious experience in the UN system, and I reckon she has also served in Afghanistan and had been here since early 2000. So, with this brief intro, I will hand over the floor to Patricia.
Really, this is really a great opportunity to join this this group today, and I really thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to highlight that museums really lie at the heart of UNESCO's mission to promote peace and understanding through international cooperation in the field of culture. So museums indeed are a very big part of UNESCO mandate and mission on promoting peace and understanding. Globally, UNESCO's adopted recommendations concerning the protection and promotion of the museums and their collections. And offering a series of guidelines to museum professionals and policymakers for unlocking the potential in social, economic, and educational development regarding museums. And those recommendations, if anyone wants them, please reach out to us and we can send a link or make sure that you get those documents, as I think they will be useful. A wide range of relevant government and non-government stakeholders working together, facilitating a participatory, inclusive, and holistic decision-making process for the development of museums supports UNESCO conventions and recommendations. Museums are key drivers for the preservation, sharing, and understanding of our global history and humanity. And following along at the beginning, the statement of Dr. Nadeem, the role of museums has changed and it's changing. Museums promote tourism, sustainable economic development, are centers for learning, education, and exploration, etc. And this really goes beyond, for lack of a better term, I'll say the traditional idea of a museum as being a repository for antiquities and display. And that certainly is important because that's a reflection of who we are and where we come from. But museums have really gone beyond that. And there's a massive potential connected to that. Since 1975, the number of museums around the world has more than doubled, with 1.1 billion people attending the 20 largest museums in the world in 2014. You know, managed correctly, museums hold a powerful and extensive potential. And actually, even when I was going through my talking points for this presentation today, it even surprised me when I thought in 2014, for the 20th largest museums worldwide, there was 1.1 billion people. And that's a lot of people coming in and out. That's a big boost to promoting the culture of a country and a place and a people, not to mention the economic development of the area. UNESCO has really been privileged to provide technical support to the government of Punjab under the Punjab Tourism Economic Growth Project, which is known as PTEG. And through that project, we have developed museum implementation plans for the Lahore and Taxila museums, supporting a long-term strategic direction for both museums, building their overall capacity and harnessing their enormous potential. However, like anything, a plan is just a plan unless it's implemented. So that's also very critical. The management plans developed in coordination with UNESCO and the government of Punjab provided comprehensive guidance on a number of matters, such as governance of the museum, the human resources, capacity building, building public engagement and education, budget management, etc., minding, taking care of, and improving the displays, etc. All of this contributing towards strengthening the overall management of and support of museums. The development of the museums in the Punjab really provide vast opportunities in understanding our collective humanity, social and economic development, educational opportunities, as well as job opportunities and growth for those local communities in those areas. And I really thank the Center for Culture and Development, for organizing this discussion with a view to support. And again, I really want to emphasize this, with a view to support regarding everything I've heard today, an inclusive process towards moving towards a sustainable management of museums and really to promote collectively the rich cultural heritage of the Punjab. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia, for your presentation. And, we hope that UNESCO will continue to fulfill its mission to preserve and promote cultural heritage, especially museums in Pakistan. And we look forward to your future participation in our activities to, put Pakistan to highlight the potential of Pakistan as a heritage destination of the world.
Thank
Right
you.
now, you're welcome. Now, with these, round of presentation, now we have, at least sort of touched every, segment of the issue, from its legal to its administrative, reforms that are being now put in place. Now, it is now time to open the floor to any questions that we may have from our listeners. And I also have a bunch of questions from some of you, so I will throw them as we go along. But first of all, let's see if there's anybody else who have a question here. Speak. Yes, I can see a gentleman here. Please introduce yourself, sir, as you put
Dr.
your question.
Nadeem, greetings.
Greetings.
I'm the UNESCO Chair on Inclusive Museums and Sustainable Heritage Development, and a former Vice President of International Council of Museums. I can see my dear colleagues, Professor Vandal, hi Sajida, and Asma. So many of you, sort of Attique, so many people that I know. And of course, UNESCO Director Patricia has set up the background, the context, for the discussion. I posted both the UNESCO recommendation in the chat box. I think it's really important because I remember when the recommendation was being adopted, a young Pakistani ambassador was quite excited and supportive of it. I think Pakistan has played a very important role in this recommendation. And but that recommendation takes into consideration the ICOM statutes. So I posted the current definition of what a museum is. Because reading through the ordinance, by Mr. Attique, thank you for sending me the ordinance. Reading through the ordinance, what I was wondering, please forgive my ignorance. Because it's an ordinance, it doesn't actually delineate what is understood as a museum legally. Most countries in their laws and ordinances, they refer to the 2007 definition of ICOM. So it doesn't, so that's my first thing. Second thing is that the ICOM, the UNESCO recommendation of 2015, which has been reviewed, I'm part of the committee that worked on the review and it was presented to the executive board. He said, the participation, all the things that you mentioned, Dr. Nadeem, and also Professor Sajida, my colleague, she mentioned, all these things come up in that UNESCO recommendation and the follow-up discussion. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to open this up because the future of museums is very uncertain in many parts of the world because of the pandemic. So many museums are closed. And what is even worse is, while the potential for tourism is there, 90% of people in South Asian countries work in the informal sector of tourism. So this also affects, museums and the informal sector of employees. So the timing of the ordinance and the discussion is very timely as to how, how you, through your leadership and the discussion that's taking place, some seminal recommendations could be made. I don't know what's possible in the legal process, but over to you, Dr. Nadeem. I just wanted to share with you a few thoughts.
So thank you for being part of our discussion. As you rightly stated, that museums are not only national concern, but also holds greater international concern. And these, especially archaeological museums, are the, hold these priceless treasures of the past. And that is why the concern with museum resonates so widely across the board. There are so many people that I have interacted who were so concerned about the fate of these museums, because as you probably would appreciate, that most of these museums, especially something like Taxila Museum that I'm sort of slightly concerned, with which actually became the reason for initiating this legislation. As I hope you would understand that initially this particular ordinance was meant for Taxila Museum alone. And later on, that committee of the bureaucrats decided to extend it to whole of Punjab. Now, as a result of that, I do see a gap between that the promise of the ordinance, the stated objectives of the ordinance, and its capacity of a handful of individuals to be able to administer, let's say, 10 museums in 10 different places. So I see, as I hear all of you, I do see that there is increasing governmentalization of the museum rather than kind of opening them up through civil society or professional associations or through private sector. So it's a more like a government trying to dominate the museums. In any case, be that as it may, now I do see Dr. Asma Ibrahim, who is the director of the State Bank Museum in Karachi, and who has an illustrious career in museum studies, also as an archaeologist. So there are so many hats that Dr. Asma Ibrahim has worn in her professional life. So I had requested her to speak, but given her parallel commitments, she said that she would sit through sit through the program and make her comments at the end. So I invited Dr. Asma to reflect on this new Punjab Museum Board, the new law in Punjab.
Well,
Dr. Asma.
thank you, Nadeem Saab, and hello, everyone. Well, Nadeem Saab has already introduced me, so I don't have to say much about myself. But I would just like to add that being in the field of museums for about 33 years, starting my career from National Museum of Pakistan, where I served for about 20 years. So this is a very, I feel that this is a great opportunity because museums were always neglected. The antiquities law was covering museums and the sites of the country. So the museum was not as big part of the ordinance or the act which we had. So there was no policy making for the museums, no board or anything. So we were working as part of government of Pakistan, and the people, the curator, I would say, they were just trained because they were there. They were not the thorough professionals, and we learned through our working in the museums, and the team which was there was not trained properly. And after 1990s there was a big gap when the senior people retired, so the badge which I belonged to were left alone, and we didn't know what to do with the museums and what actually it is. So we learned on our own, and that is one thing for which I would support this act to be there, because I hope that this act will help in museum management and making the policies and planning for new museums, which is very, very important, which I feel that like some private museums are just coming up and we don't know what are the objectives, what are the vision and mission of these museums. So at least this board or this law will regulate them. Then there will be a lack of sustainability in our museums and no strategic planning. We never think about strategic planning in our museums. Finances is a big problem for us. Then capacity building. Recruitment is a big issue. We cannot recruit people for, like, National Museum is almost empty. I would just talk about from my point of view here in Sindh. So it's almost empty, and we had to borrow one curator from Islamabad for the National Museum of Pakistan. So you can imagine. And it has changed its status from Sindh government to federal, then from federal to Sindh again, and now it has gone back to federal. So during this process, there is a big damage happened to the reserve collections of the museum, to the display. 3 galleries of the museum are closed. So it is a very serious problem, I would say. The second important thing is that when the devolution happened, which Attique mentioned in 2011, it was done without any preparation. There was no preparation for with the provinces to handle all these things, to handle the archaeological sites or the museums. So we were just totally shocked, and we didn't know how to do that. And still in Sindh, we have no trained people in archaeology or museums. So this is a big setback which we had in this field. So I would think I would be very positive about this act or the law which is coming up, that it will help us in solving the problems of the museums, and it will give more prominence to the museums in Pakistan, which we were always lacking, and we were feeling that we are like going on without any plan. It was like any other government office which was going on. So the people who were working there were just the government officers. I'm sorry, I was there for 20 years, but I felt this way that so we need some proper monitoring, we need some proper planning, and we need some proper management for these museums and recruitment plans for young people to come up and for their training. So I would be happy if this law is enacted.
Gee, thank you, Dr. Asma. I also have a comment to make, but I would, before I do that, I would let Professor Fauzia Qureshi, who is here with us and sat through the entire presentation. She might have a question and a comment. Would you, Professor Fauzia, please? She's also the, let me quickly introduce Professor Fauzia. Besides being a renowned architect, she is also the president of the ICOMOS, and she's working sort of tirelessly for the preservation of Pakistan's built heritage. Over to you, Professor Fauzia.
Thank you, Nadeem. Very opportune time for discussion of this new ordinance that has come up, which whose lifespan is going to be only 90 days. And we hope that in a way it is a good move. However, I think its responsibilities, like earlier mentioned by some of the other participants, was that it should primarily be based at a policy making level. We have got to devolutionize the significance of museums, considering the number of museums you just mentioned. And you did mention that this was going to be something that you were planning, hoping to implement at the Taxila Museum level. For instance, in the case of Lahore Museum, there is already a board, but we see the condition of what is happening at the Lahore Museum, which is pretty pathetic. It is it is top heavy with the government officials being there, and the private sector members really, whatever recommendations they give, somehow the implementation is inadvertently lacking. So here we're going to have one large body once again regulating the condition of the artists or the public sector. Hopefully it will only be limited to the public sector museums, because the private sector museums are probably going to get into arms if the public sector board starts taking on that their responsibility. Since the rules and regulations out, I think it's very critical that this board does how shall I put it, devolve a lot of its responsibilities to a number of the sub boards for each museum. And it should be based primarily on what the responsibilities of each sub museum's board's recommendations are, and how it should then be particularly when it comes to finances. For instance, the finances, when we look at the Lahore Museum, the finances, even if they're there, they inadvertently are, har saal wo kya kehte hain, lapse ho jate hain. So it's got to be a two-way system. One, it has to be, at a district level or at a museum level, there should be boards. And I'm just wondering how the rules and regulations are going to be worked out, and whether the members of the current recommended board, would they be making it out? I think we need to go to the media, and we need to publicize this and to involve the citizens to play a more participatory role in how this board should be functioning in the immediate future, considering the ordinance is there only for 90 days. there are a number of issues, for instance, when there are issues within this this board ki jo, regulations hai abhi, where it says employees of the board option is to come up with their concept of whether they want to be retained or whether they for up to 1 year, but the ordinance is only there for 90 days. How is this, how are this board talking about providing employees overall year to sort of decide whether they want to work under this board or whether
Yes.
under the, or as employees of the. So there are a number of issues, and I think it has been drafted out in a great rush, and we need to work out a system whereby which the rules and regulations will be worked out. And in order to do that, we need to have a more participatory dialogue with and I think we need to look into the ICOM museums, the vision and the recommendations that are there from UNESCO before we, not comments, but ensuring that the rules and regulations and the vision that UNESCO and ICOM come up with are included within this board. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Fauzia Qureshi Sahiba. As I could, as it could be inferred from the conversation here that there are certain risks and opportunities involved under the institutional arrangement which will be put in place under the new law. So there are risks and opportunities, and we need to rationally calculate both of them. So I think one, I hope in the future, if we could have more participants from the museums itself, which are going to be affected. Let's say somebody, if they could fairly speak about their service matters and how, what recommendations can be generated, which will lead to certain rules and regulations, instead of simply replicating the existing template. As we see in this particular draft, it's a replication of an autonomous ordinance of an autonomous institution, and as I see it, it resembles quite a bit with the NC ordinance of 1985 that I remember, when National College of Arts became an autonomous institution. Be that as it may, but the challenge to me is that that autonomous institution had a very defined universe. Here, under this board, there's almost at sort of almost infinite scope of work for the board. If there are like 10 museums now, there could be like 15 museums down the road. So I think it is very problematic, and it's yet not clear whether the rules and regulation which will be based on that ordinance will turn it into a management board or a policy board. It could be good to have a policy board for the museum, but if it tries to manage, then there will be a crisis, and then of course there will be series of if you like subcommittees, if you like, that will be needed to run the museum affair, to govern the museum affair. So governance of a museum affair is a very major step, and as rightly sort of underscored by all the speakers, that it needs more brainstorming, it needs more attention from public, it needs more debate and stakeholder consultations to make it work better. And there's no harm in learning from the South Asian experience as well, how India has done it, how they are doing it, how other countries are doing it.
Dr. Saab, if I may,
any comments that you have, Mashaam, please?
If I may just clarify a couple of things. So firstly, yes, the law does envision that subcommittees will be formed for various purposes, and for, under the regulation, there'll be various subcommittees looking into different matters. More importantly, so not all museums will be coming under the scope of this law. And I think a law at a regional level, such as this law, like this law is only for the level for the province of Punjab, which is why the law only defines a museum to mean that museum which has been notified by the ordinance. So the definition of the museum, as pertinent as I believe it is, as my esteemed the esteemed guest stated earlier, as important as it is, I think in this statute, the purpose of not putting the definition was because they want to limit the scope of the museums that would be regulated by that the board would come under the ambit of this board. Furthermore, so if I could just come back a little bit on the powers and functions. So it says to formulate policies, plans, and programs for protection, maintenance, and management. So yes, it is a policy board, but at the same time, it also states and manage and regulate the finance, accounts, and investment. So it might not be managing the routine affairs of such museums which will be notified, but rather it will regulate their finances, their accounts, and their investments, and the lending of various articles, etc., depending on further rules as they are created. So I just wanted to give these small clarifications.
Professor Vandal, if you have any response to these questions, or I think you will have to unmute yourself.
I think we should, in different ways, the emphasis has been more or less the same by everybody. And I think the really alarming part of it is that something which is a great opportunity for the Punjab, because we haven't had the framework as yet. But we should be able to kind of bring in the private sector very much within the ambit. There is no criteria which we have got at the moment. Okay, how do you include a museum? And what are the benefits of being in this thing? You know, in the being under this, facilitated by this act or the ordinance. There's no clarity of that. And there will be a backlash if people do not understand. You know, there will be a resistance to it. I had a discussion, and incidentally, once with the Taxila Museum, and I was quite surprised to see that they've gone through getting a grant from the government and then not a grant from the government, and this has been a ping pong for them all along. So the clarity must be there. Yeah, I think all museums must aim to get into this, into this ambit by having a proper kind of a criteria that you set out and things like that. So the guidelines of making this functional, whether it's route regulations, whatever, I think that needs to be set out very clearly. The other thing that Professor Galla also mentioned, and I think it's very critical, that usually ordinances or acts start with the idea of having a preamble to it, which puts the conceptual frame in place.
Yes,
where are we coming from? For example, we could have something, it's going to be inclusive and participatory, this, that, and the other. And that kind of guides the law then. So we have, if you look at the preamble out here, firstly, it's very short and it's more like for the efficient governance and management and all that. But I think we need a little bit more than that, because it's a cultural field that you're dealing with.
Right. Thank you very much.
That's what might, as a comment.
It's a very important point here. Attique sir, would you like to make any further point?
Just few words. Actually, as Ma'am Sajida and Dr. Asma Ibrahim and Dr. Fauzia Qureshi, very learned advocate, they spoke about this ordinance. In my opinion, this is just a start. And in coming days, because we have International Council of Museum National Committee, we have Museum Association of Pakistan. These two institutions were not existing for a long time in Pakistan. So actively, these two will play a role in developing this kind of infrastructure for the future museology in Pakistan. So hopefully, the forums are always open to discuss and to find new ways regarding the development of museum and museology in Pakistan. It's not only for Punjab. As Dr. Asma Ibrahim said that she spoke about the National Museum of Pakistan. I think most of the people are not aware about the establishment of National Museum of Pakistan. When there was no budget for Pakistan, the Indians were trying to, as Amar Swama Gwami will elaborate more about the Indian National Museum. And the same on the same pattern, National Museum of Pakistan was established in 1949. Indian National Museum was established in 1946. So it was a passion to establish their National Museum of Pakistan and National Museum of India after partition. So importance is there. We have to address more and more things. We have to remove so many grievances, past grievances, armed conflict issues, and so many things. We have common cultural things between our these Asian side. So museums can play an important role. But as Dr. Asma Ibrahim told about the National Museum of Pakistan, what is the condition in 2021 about the management and the policy about the National Museum of Pakistan? So we, the people, the concerned people, along with our international partners like UNESCO, we are doing our efforts. And in future, definitely, our younger generation, younger museologists will find some best environment for to grow museum and museology in Pakistan. Thank you.
Right. There is a question from ICOM. I would request Iza Khan, if she's there, if she's still listening. Otherwise, there's a question which has been put up that everybody could read. Now, it says that ICOM has been advocating for museum law, and we are very glad that it is now taking place now. But at the same time, clause 17 is haunting, which is clause 17 about indemnity, which says no suit, persecution, or any other legal proceeding shall lie against the board, the CEO, any member, servant, purported under the audit. You could say they could not be held accountable. Probably this clause 17 says. Now the question is that given this huge amount of funds and priceless treasures at their disposal, almost at the disposal of the board, how would this clause may function? I mean, it might act as a shield against all kinds of checks against the willful authority of the board. So that is a question, and maybe Mashaam can respond to it, and anybody else, if they want to respond to it, they can just raise their hand. Mashaam, are you still there? No. Okay, Dr. Asma, please, you go ahead.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The question is there could be a conflict of interest between the board and what they hold. In a say that this particular clause 17 regarding indemnity, the CEO or any other members cannot be liable for their willful use of authority. Is that so?
So this is a standard clause that is generally whenever such bodies are created by the government. This is a standard clause that is put in, which says that there's no suit, there's no legal proceedings that can be brought against the board or any members for something that they've done in good faith. So this is a general indemnity clause that such ordinances or acts of parliament or the assemblies have, and this is nothing out of the ordinary. This does not have anything in particular to do with conflict of interest. Of course, where there is a conflict of interest, and since at the moment this ordinance doesn't particularly deal with that, the rules of proprietary will apply, and wherever there is such an interest by any member, either that particular member will be reclused from having a say in that particular matter, or of course there are further regulations and rules that have to be drafted on the issue, so maybe they will say something further on these.
Right, thank you. Dr. Asma?
Yes, I would like to say that this clause doesn't matter at all because CEO's level would be very high, and we have a whole system of registration, digitization of antiquities. There is a curator. Suppose under the CEO would come director, curator, then assistant curator, and nobody can just pilferage with the antiquities or anything in the museum like that. And on a lighter note, even if they have, I have never seen a case against any director of the museum or curator who are actually done everything, and we have been filing the cases against them, my own self, but nothing happened. So there is no danger in that. The CEO's level is quite high, and I doubt very much that he would be able to do any pilferage in the reserves or in the display of a museum. So this is just a clause, and that is there for it is. I think it's a law language or something, but it doesn't really matter actually. So.
Yeah. Right, now we have we intend to close this session at 5:30. So we have last 7 minutes. If any of you would like to share anything further, you are most welcome. Yes, please.
Can I say something?
So there are two questions. So who would like to go first?
Prof.
Ji, please. Okay, Professor Vandal, you go ahead.
You're the moderator. Okay. I'll be extremely brief. I think this indemnity clause is not correct. I have not seen this in every act and all that, so it's not there. And it actually makes it like an encouragement to please get onto the sports that you can steal from museums. So it is almost reading like that. Every consultant, every employee, the CEO, and you name it, they're all being given a free hand. Nothing worked like that. I think it could be simply said that the law of Pakistan will apply. Whatever the law is for thefts. There's a law in Pakistan that if you steal something is done to you. It's not that you're scot-free. And we know that some of the museums have been emptied by, so let's not give a clause like that.
Right. I think there's yes, Professor Galla, you go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nadeem. I think it's very interesting discussion in relation to 17. Two things come to my mind. The first thing is the ICOM Code of Ethics. I think that all museums in the world are expected to adhere to the ICOM Code of Ethics. And the Code of Ethics deal with a lot of these issues. And of course, a Code of Ethics is not a law for compliance, it's aspirational. The second thing is in terms of indemnity, different countries have it different ways. Like some countries, the countries, depending on the law, if the collections are deemed to be part of the national estate, then the national government indemnifies. In some countries, it's the provinces or the states that indemnify. And that even in indemnification, it's not only about the security of collections, but also if you're talking about loans for exhibitions, loans for international exhibitions, receiving or sending objects, indemnification is critical. You cannot have, to the best of my knowledge, I could be wrong, that under Pakistani law, you cannot have collections leaving the country from Pakistan for an overseas exhibition unless they're indemnified by the state of Pakistan. So I just wanted to share that.